Hey Film Buffs, welcome back to Film Feature 43. I just got done watching Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers movie on Disney Plus, and I thought it was different enough and silly enough that I wanted to do a review about it and kind of tie in a theory that I have about the movie just to make the video a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to do the theory first, the review second, so without further ado, let's get into it. So my theory is that this movie is actually a sequel to Who Framed Roger Rabbit. The first point that I have is fairly obvious. If you've seen both movies, you kind of get it. Cartoons and humans live together. I mean, it's really no secret in either movie. They go to school together, they ride on the same roads, they eat the same restaurants, they work the same jobs. They are one big happy community for the most part. And although Who Framed Roger Rabbit wasn't the first movie to mix live action and animation, and since then Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers isn't the last movie to do it, they do have a similarity that most movies don't have. When you think of the Mary Poppins and the Cool Worlds and Space Jam 1 and 2s, Looney Tunes Back in Actions and the Enchanteds, most movies tend to stick within their studios whenever they're casting their animated characters. If you're watching a movie about the Muppets, you're mainly going to see people in the world of the Muppets. If you're watching something like Looney Tunes Back in Action, you may get a cameo from Scooby-Doo, but Mickey Mouse and the gang are not going to show up. But that's not true of Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers. In Who Framed Roger Rabbit, it's not just a Disney movie. You have Warner Brothers characters, Disney characters, and you got even fictional characters from Acme Studios and Arcade Maroon Studios. And Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers are the same. You got mentions of Nicktoons, Looney Tunes, Batman, E.T. It's just a big list of characters from multiple different studios. It's almost like the world of Roger Rabbit that was supposed to take place in the 1940s has grown and more studios have popped up like what happened in the real world. And this is what a real-world 2022 Who Framed Roger Rabbit world would look like. And real-world studios aren't the only ones that get in on the fun of this movie. There is a cameo from Roger Rabbit, and Jessica Rabbit is mentioned as well. And outside of a few comic strips, a few shorts, and Tiny Toon Adventure.
Morning, Roger.
Yeah, pleasant, isn't it?
Roger Rabbit hasn't really appeared in anything else since his movie. And a little side note that I thought it was interesting while I was kind of researching Roger Rabbit to make this video to make sure I wasn't wrong or saying anything incorrect, Steven Spielberg actually did the voice for Roger Rabbit in Tiny Toon Adventures for an episode, so I thought that was kind of interesting. So one hole you might be trying to poke in this theory is Who Framed Roger Rabbit takes place in the 1940s, and Chip 'n Dale were around in the 1940s, so how could they possibly went to elementary school in the 1980s and been a hit on TV in the 1990s? Because we see them age in Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, so how could they have been around the 1940s? And to that I say, in this movie universe, I don't think they were. I might be wrong, but I don't ever remember seeing them in the final cut of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So it's possible that they didn't actually exist in the 1940s in the Who Framed Roger Rabbit timeline. I mean, if you think about it, Who Framed Roger Rabbit is kind of an allegory for segregation in America in the 1940s. So this movie could be, to not get too heavy, a post-segregation look of the Who Framed Roger Rabbit timeline. You have Toons and humans living together and actually working together. And Who Framed Roger Rabbit, we don't really see that too much. I mean, the cartoons tend to be more either servants or living in their own toon world where they're not servants to humans. So if Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers is a post-segregation look of the United States, then there's no need for Toontown because Toons don't need to hide in this place away from humans anymore. So maybe that means that Toontown doesn't exist anymore and an interstate highway actually was built where Toontown was. Akiva Schaffer, he of the Turtleneck and Chains, and just happened to be director of this movie, has talked about his influences that came in from Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and even mentioned Who Framed Roger Rabbit as a reason why he took on the directing duties of this movie. So I think And my theory is that he secretly made a sequel to the 1988 classic. But instead of making an adult film with smoking and swearing and sexual harassment and nightmare-inducing dipping scenes, he made a more kid-friendly version of the Roger Rabbit universe that we know, with stinky cheese and a more kid-friendly bootlegging operation. So that's my kind of goofy theory. As far as the movie itself goes, I think the 2D animation was a little wonky whenever it was on a live-action background, especially Chip and Sweet Pete's mouths as they moved. There were jokes about the uncanny valley and how those characters didn't really look right, but when specifically Chip was talking, I didn't like the way that looked. The 3D animation on Dale, however...
Thanks, and you look different.
Hey, it's no secret I had the CGI surgery done, and it's done wonders rejuvenating my career.
The 3D animation in this, when they weren't trying to make it look bad, actually came out above the traditional animation. And for this movie being geared towards kids, the humor in it made me laugh from time to time. The fact that they addressed exotic dancers having the same names as the 70-year-old cartoon characters.
What's the first thing that pops into your head when I say Chip and Dale? I bet it's these guys!
Was pretty funny. All the years of my life, I had the same question. Were these exotic dancers named after these cartoon chipmunks for over 40 years? And the answer to that is actually no. Thanks to Wikipedia, I know that they're actually named after the 18th century furniture that were in most of their nudie clubs, so there's something else I learned. This movie also throws in a 2020 sleep paralysis demon, and the fact that they got the rights to do so, and they did it, is actually pretty impressive, and at the same time pretty funny, calling back to the collective internet hive mind that took down that version of Sonic is actually a pretty funny thing, and the fact that that version of Sonic is actually who called it out is just funny. As always, I'm impressed when an actor can act against nothing. The live action cast, specifically Kiki Lane, did a very good job acting against things that weren't there, and making the change in voice was a smart idea. If we had to listen for an hour and a half of the squeaky high-pitched voice of Chip and Dale, it would have got old kind of fast, even though we've been listening to those voices since the 1940s. I believe that changing out those high-pitched squeaky voices and just giving nods to them for Andy Samberg and John Mulaney is really smart, and the casting of Andy Samberg and John Mulaney is also really smart because their personalities are Chip and Dale personalities. You have the persona of a straight-laced guy and this idiot who never knows what's going on in these cartoon chipmunks that have been their personality since the 1940s, and it just worked. With all that being said, the canon world of Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers is a little strange. I mean, you have Zipper and Ratchet getting married and having kids. That's a little weird. And in the original cartoon, Monterey Jack is always obsessed with and in this movie, we find out that he has a real-life addiction to cheese. And it must have been so bad during the 1990s that they worked that into the script because they couldn't get him to stop eating cheese. Like, that's a little messed up. They should have probably got him some help. All in all, if you're a 90s kid and you grew up on the nostalgia of Disney Saturday morning cartoons, I think this was a good fan service movie in that regard. They mentioned Bonkers and Tailspin and Darkwing Duck and just cartoons like that a lot of people forget existed. It was fun to see how the characters change over time, and some being bitter and some being sick of being cartoons and wanting to change into the CGI form. It was just interesting to see. And if you're an adult and you have kids, and even if you didn't watch the Saturday morning cartoons, it's something that's easy to watch for an hour and a half. Definitely worth a watch. I'd give it probably a B. I found it enjoyable. With all that being said, I would give it a watch. I think it's worth it. It's an hour and a half. You'll get a laugh or two out of it, and it's a good way to bond with your kids if you have kids. It's a good way to look back on nostalgia if you don't. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.